Welcome back to Be the Change podcast with me, Stephanie Howlett, CEO of DiversityNL. Become awakened, create culture of inclusion, be brave, have impact by being an ally. Welcome to today's podcast. I'm very happy to have you with us, Kathy. Thanks for making the time. I truly appreciate having you here.
You're welcome. I think that it's going to be a great chat.
Absolutely. So, Kathy, you're our interim director with InclusionNL and EmpowerNL. So, tell us a little bit about your role and how that looks.
So yeah, I've been the interim executive director at Empower, the Disability Resource Center now for well over a year. And I think that hopefully we'll get some permanent positions and information about that really soon. But prior to that, I was the manager of InclusionNL. And really, over the course of the past year, I've still maintained both roles in terms of being the lead in InclusionNL and EmpowerNL. So my job is really to help support businesses in our community in order to create barrier-free workspaces. And Empower is, also responsible for providing supports to people with cross disabilities. So the two of us married into the kind of the same family is really a great fit. So InclusionNL is really the corporate program of Empower, and we've been around now 9 years. We're going to be 10 years old next year. So we're pretty pleased about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit over the past couple of years,
Yeah.
partnering on different events, making really sure that businesses, I think people are, I guess, informed about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And certainly those are buzzwords these days. And I guess you and I have, taken upon to look at networking with our local DE&I folks within organizations, within Newfoundland and Labrador, really having a look at, who's out there, what's the great work that organizations are doing, and how do we support one another? So as Inclusion and EmpowerNL, you provide a fantastic service to the community and to the business community. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you do.
Oh, Steph, we do some pretty funky stuff, let me tell you. And we've got some great partners. And over the course of the past 10 years, we have done some phenomenal things. I remember when we first started out, my knuckles were like blood red from knocking on businesses' doors, just getting them to try to listen to me. And now I'm almost nervous to answer the phone because so many people are reaching out. So what a great complaint, right? We never get enough people calling our phones. And really what we do is we just really listen to the needs of people in our community, businesses in our community, and we listen to what it is that they feel that they have gaps in. And most importantly, I guess what we do is we provide expertise and insights in terms of helping them break down barriers specifically for people with disabilities. InclusionNL, we only hire people with lived experience of disabilities. So, we always get an opportunity to work firsthand, and the employer gets an opportunity to work firsthand with experts with lived experience and learn from them in terms of how we break down barriers and, how we build confidence in accessibility and what that looks like. When we first started out, we talked a lot about people with disabilities and what does the person with the disability need? And we don't talk about that anymore. What we talk about now is what are your obligations to provide accessibility features? When InclusionNL started, we never had any provincial legislation or federal legislation, really, in terms of accessibility acts and those sorts of things. So we kept continuing to have a conversation about best practice with businesses. Now, and I giggle because now we're having conversations about compliance and legislative responsibilities. And for the past 10 years with InclusionNL, and I've been with Empower for 18 years. So even 8 years before that, we always talked best practice, best practice, best practice. And now we're sitting here like, with grins on our faces like Cheshire Cat saying, oh no, times have changed. Now you have to comply to legislation. Thank you very much. And in your compliance to legislation, you must consult with people with disabilities. It's a part of the Accessibility Act. So here we are, sitting pretty, because I think that we're in a great position to even move forward related to accessibility in our province.
Absolutely. And I mean, in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have a lot of businesses and organizations. And I think ultimately people want to do better and learn more. So I know I've reached out to you before on surveys wanting to put the right language in there. So I think when people think disability, they think it's what you can see. But explain to us, it's not all about what you can see. There's many different types of disabilities.
Absolutely. Empower and InclusionNL operate from a cross disability lens. And another term that we also use often would be a disability lens. And they would be folks like the Newfoundland and Labrador Association of the Deaf, or the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association, CNIB. They provide services specifically to one cohort within our disability community per se. But we provide a cross disability lens. So if we were to look at the stats around disability in our province, let's just say that the last percentage number we got was back in 2017. I think there's a new percentage number coming out next year, and that's going to be surprising, let me tell you. But if we look at 22% of our population, that's like over 115,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians in the employment age between the age of 15 and 64 who identify as having barriers in their daily lives. So, that speaks volumes to the different types of supports that businesses would need. They would need support from anything from creating accessible documents for employees or customers to accessible built environments. If you're operating a store or a restaurant or something that would be, a public facing type of business, then you've got double the responsibility for your customers and your employees. Because if we're saying that 22% of our population has disabilities, we're saying that 22% of your workforce also has disabilities and are representative of that.
That's a huge number.
It's
Huge.
huge.
So
Yes.
some latest statistics that I've done through benchmarking is it was actually as high as 30%.
Yes,
Because the disability that people don't always see is mental health. And mental
that's
health
right.
is so important and it affects all
Yes.
of us.
Yes,
Truly,
it sure
like,
does.
either personally, folks we're working with, and pandemic, of course, has made it even, I think, more detrimental to, us not seeing people, not connecting in with people, and kind of living in our own little silo bubble. So, that's
You're right.
huge mental health that role. And I don't know if you've seen a lot of mental health people talking about mental health and mental health disabilities these days.
No. In these statistics that we cite, and it's from Stats Canada, so they're the only current statistics that we can use. It says that for folks with mental health disabilities, it's 7% of the population. Now, I always argue that percentage. That particular survey was done back in 2017, so 2016 even. We didn't have the same educational consciousness around mental health and how mainstream the education has become around that at the moment. I would say the percentages are significantly higher. And really looking forward to seeing what they're going to be at the next census taking. But you're absolutely right. Folks with mental health disabilities is significantly downplayed. Also, too, what we haven't seen a good capture on in terms of data are folks with neurodiversities, folks with autism, or who are on the Asperger's spectrum disorder. We still haven't seen any good statistics around folks from those categories as well.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder, is it because we're not asking the question?
Yeah,
Like we
yeah,
don't really dive into some of these things, maybe out of fear of making mistakes, maybe the unknown, or not really being educated on it. But I think, we can all be educated on all these different aspects, and we can all learn. And I think being open and that understanding piece is a big piece of the work that we both do,
yeah,
looking at that and gaining knowledge, and sharing knowledge. And I think that's important. Like I know, you as the interim director, you're constantly putting out posts, looking at, how do we help people, through the InclusionNL aspect, putting out
yeah,
about, supporting people, we're here for you, we provide these services, and just, I think being, transparent with what you do, and being
yes,
open, I think is truly
yes.
important.
Absolutely. Absolutely, for sure. And the other thing too, Steph, that's really important to look at for a person with a disability is that there's so many intersectionalities within that individual. They are absolutely a person with a disability, and lots of times, wrongly, they are always judged based on that disability and not based on their abilities or not based on their other qualities or talents or skills or attributions at all. So breaking down that stigma and those silos, as you had mentioned earlier, is just huge in terms of creating a respectful place for everybody.
Definitely. So I guess just give us some tidbits, because person-centered versus disability-centered, what is that language and what does that look like now?
Well, great question. When we talk to businesses, we talk to businesses about, do you talk about a person first approach or an identity first approach? We always, always recommend to businesses that they use a person first approach, which is a default. So instead of identifying a person as a disabled person, then really what you're doing is you are identifying that the person has a disability, or the person is first, and then whatever the attribute that you want to identify with that person, is identified. Like I would be a person who uses a mobility device. In terms of my language, in terms of my personal identification, I would almost say that, I am a dyke who uses a scooter. And it's that's not connected to my career at all. That's just my own personal identity. But still, it's one that I use because of the political correctness of it. Not everybody has that same comfort level.
Absolutely.
Right.
So we talk about intersectionalities, and everyone listening may not know what that means. So it's all the different pieces of our identity. So just give us an example, like I'm queer, I'm a woman, I'm a business owner, I'm a fur mama of 2 fur babies, I'm a wife, like I'm white, I'm a settler. So those are all of our identities. So it's kind of complex and complicated, isn't it?
You're
Right.
right.
So
Yes.
when we look at it, so what are all the identities that people have? So it's not putting that disability, that mental health disability, the physical disability first. It's the person, like really centering
Right.
them into your workplaces, into your schools, and normalizing. I think normalizing
Yeah.
out of this language is so important. What are your thoughts on that?
You're right. And when we first met, I think that we were actually sharing a podium where we were, delivering the exact same message. And I was ahead of you, and I was sharing a message of barrier-free environments based on people with disabilities. And you came up immediately behind me and were sharing insights around, being gender inclusive, being queer inclusive, and all that stuff. And I'm going back sitting to my colleague like, who is that person? And how come I haven't met them yet? As an example. But intersectionalities play on all of our work. And at Empower, we very much identify as a safe space, an open space for queer folks, for trans folks, for whoever folk want to come in. It doesn't matter to us who you are. We don't ask questions or anything like that. So we try to be not only accessible but in terms of infrastructure, but certainly accessible in terms of practice and policy too, right?
Absolutely. And some thoughts on, like, a lot of conversation is around the acronyms. Everything is an acronym. So DEI, DEIB, IDEA, all of these sorts of things are acronyms. And people always ask, like, what's the best acronym? I'm like, well, what would you like to define your company? It's your acronym. What do you put first? Like, what does that look like for you as an organization? So let's talk acronyms, what that looks like. What's your thoughts on them?
The best acronym, as far as I'm concerned, is no acronym.
Mm,
And of course, the reason for that is because some folks who have neurodiversities really struggle with acronyms. And don't get me wrong, in the disability community, we use acronyms all the time, but they aren't accessible, because if anything, an acronym could be interpretational. It's one of the reasons why we didn't, create an acronym per se for Empower or for InclusionNL, because we knew that once you do create an acronym, what you're doing is creating a label to create interpretation. And I understand that, branding is important, certainly, but lots of times clear and accessible branding reaches more people.
interesting. That's thought provoking. I
Yeah.
guess, yeah. And I guess a conversation I have a lot of times is around labeling. And I said, I wish there were no labels, but how do you normalize without creating labels sometime? That whole in-depth conversation of making people understand that these things are okay to talk about, normalizing, mental health, different stigmas, normalizing, a neurodiversity. So people have a neurodiversity. Okay, like, let's get on with the work. Like, that's great. You have a neurodiversity. How do we help you with that? How do we create accommodations, but not being held back in that one position or pigeonholing people?
Embracing the talent,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I always believe that labels are just something that you apply to a paper file folder, and that's where they always should be. You know, they shouldn't be attached to any sort of a human being who is navigating this world, trying to engage to the best of their ability, without question. I remember one time though, when I was supporting a person, supporting a business, and they wanted me to come in to do an accessibility review because they were very successful and they had a number of people on their team who had autism. And they were trying to expand their business to bring other people with disabilities into their warehouse. They'd had such a great experience with their employees with autism that maybe they thought that they could expand to include people with physical disabilities, people who were deaf, and all those things. And this was a little while back. Like this was when Target was closing. So it just wasn't yesterday. And that business was in the business of selling lottery tickets, and they were responsible for distributing lottery tickets in Canada to up to Ontario and down the eastern seaboard of the U.S. And they were successful in bringing in employees with autism because the main job for that employee would be to pull any irregulars of the lottery tickets that, as they were coming out of production. And the more errors you found, the more financial reward you would get at the end of the month. Um, so they wanted to see if they could, based on the height of their production tables and things, see if they could bring in folks who use wheelchairs and other types of disabilities. So it just kind of goes to show you that once an employer gets a confidence level around, folks with disabilities and recognize the person's talent, then they would absolutely open up their perspectives in terms of helping other people and bringing them in.
Are you wondering how you can be the change within your organization? Are you struggling with where to start to on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? If so, reach out to me, Stephanie Howlett, CEO of InclusionNL. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. We can help. We can help you be the change. We can help you make impact. We can help you and your organization through this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think there's that bias or unconscious bias that, for instance, if a person's in a wheelchair or has an adaptive device, that they should be in an office setting, not
Yes.
on a construction, not on a ship, a vessel, not mining, not in these industries that are mostly male-dominated oriented industries within Newfoundland and Labrador. So there's that bias or unconscious bias that you're pigeonholed into, you can do this work only.
You're right, and if we go back to the statistics, I said earlier that 22% of our population identify as people with disabilities. Only 10% of that number are folks with mobility disabilities. And mobility disabilities would be, something that would be more visible. A person would use a mobility device, a person with partial sight would use a white cane or have a guide dog. So there are things that you can see about the person in terms of disability. But 12% of our population identifies experiencing barriers and they have invisible disabilities. So, no longer can we just say that disability is connected to, a person who uses a wheelchair, because there's a whole scope of different types of disabilities that would be out there. And when we're looking at getting employment in, natural resource type industries like we're currently working with, I mean, we work with oil and gas, we're working with, gold mining and renewable energies, and now the new hydrogen things and the windmills. It's all so exciting. But it's also very groundbreaking in terms of making sure that people with disabilities are included as well, right? We're currently doing some research in partnership with Memorial, just specifically around people with disabilities and employment equity and what that looks like for, the gold mining camp that's being set up in Grand Falls, Windsor area, or for the oil and gas industry, or, what's happening down the Burin Peninsula with wind energy. And so, yeah, we are right in there, just snuggled right in with everybody, trying to make sure that everybody has the same lens.
Absolutely. And I think that that's key, that everyone gets the same opportunity, the same lens. And if they don't have that lens, shedding some light on potential things that we can do to be helpful. Accommodations. I mean, that word comes up a lot, accommodations. And when people think accommodations, they think money. I got to spend money. It's not
Yes,
happening because we can't
I
afford
stopped
it.
using the word.
right?
I
Yeah.
did. I stopped using the word because every time I approached an employer and talked about accommodations, they immediately saw a no less than a $500 bill rang in front of their eyes. And that's such misinformation that now we use the words workplace adjustments. And what type of an adjustment does a person with a disability need? Well, perhaps they need to leave at 3:30 in the afternoon in order to catch public transit, just the same as somebody who's a parent needs to leave to go pick up a child. It's an adjustment. It's not a huge, horrific, accommodation that's going to, put you into, into debt and those sorts of things. Um, but I know that this interview is time limited, and I can go on and on and on, Steph. And I just kind of wanted to point out the work that you and I have been doing, specifically around creating messages, between InclusionNL and DiversityNL, and the collaboration that we've started about the social media campaign that we've been working on. We've also been working together on developing a network of key stakeholders in the DEIB kind of community, and what that looks like. And I guess I just wanted to reiterate how exciting that is. And, it's great for you and I to sit here and talk about, what we're doing with businesses and what we're doing with, corporate world around DEIB and what that looks like. But it's also really important, too, to talk about the social connections to disability and equity and inclusion and belonging, and to really, I really think that the work that you and I have started around developing a network, and we have this vision of having a summit, and woohoo, it's all so exciting that I think that over the course of the coming months, we're going to have a lot of fun building up this presence and what that looks like.
Absolutely. And if folks haven't checked us out on LinkedIn, they can certainly check out both of our profiles and get to see, I guess, a little bit about what this looks like. We have an upcoming meeting in April. I'm so excited for it because there's folks that have reached out from autism community, folks that have reached out from different communities that I didn't know they'd connect in with us, to be honest, or be interested in it. So I think we have a diverse group, and I think we'll have a great conversation about all different aspects of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I think it's exciting, throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, there's so many different organizations and groups that this is open to whoever wants to join us. The barrier, I mean, certainly it's us creating a safe, respectable place, I think, where we can share resources and supports. And I think that's really important because we don't always have, we're working in silos a lot of times as consultants and organizations, and women's organization, disability lens organization, anti-racism, indigenous, 2S LGBTQ plus, like all of us working together, neurodiversities, everyone working together. I think looking at how do we do better and how do we help and create impact? Like that's my word. It's always impact. Like how do we create that impact together? And it's exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is exciting. And I think it's just a great opportunity to kind of bridge together people who are in social kinds of contexts around, diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, as well as bringing corporate sides of it as well. And just really looking forward to seeing where this energy will go. I know that there's lots of people interested in community around it. And, we have visions of having this summit where we're all going to be in the same room talking about all this funky stuff. And I think it's just going to be phenomenal, and it's going to be accessible.
Absolutely. If there's anything that I've learned is accessibility from you, looking at how we all do that, because it doesn't cost. A lot of things don't cost. Things virtually don't cost. Like look at, what we can put into place to help. Putting in that description, putting into alt text, putting in those sorts of things. So when we're on sessions like this, if they're training sessions, we make them so that people can see, we enable different pieces of the devices, so to make it more accessible.
It's interesting just to kind of see the evolution of the term accessible and what that looks like. I mean, at one point, even 5 years ago, the majority of the conversations we would have around accessibility was around physical built environment. But then COVID struck, and then everybody stayed home. And then we were at InclusionNL inundated with inquiries about how to make technology accessible. And that was brand new conversations that we had. And it was really, I thought, interesting how people thought it was just a huge mystery. that we needed to also make technology accessible. And you just had mentioned, alt tags on photos and image descriptions and all those kinds of things. It has been a huge learning curve for folks around really identifying accessibility and technology. And we've been calling it a silver lining, because we haven't, before ever had to provide so much education and information around what does accessible technology mean. But also what it's also done, Steph, is it's created an additional lining, because it's provided opportunities for people to find employment and maintain employment from their home. I mean, ironically enough, for some people, their home is their most accessible place. And if they can hook into their employment through technology, then we are breaking down even more barriers than what we even thought.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the pandemic has definitely taught us that we don't have to have a bum in a seat in a business, in an organization, that depending on what you're doing, of course, like you can work from home and have the accessibilities of what you need. It's easier, and it's you don't have to leave your house, right? You don't have to try to do all those things in the morning if you can do it home on your computer screen or with your telephone or whatever setup that you need. I mean,
That's right.
it's proven that, and we can be very efficient and effective.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
It has been a pure pleasure. Anything else that you'd like to share with us before we leave? And
I think that I pretty well said all my points, Steph. But you know what? I'm gonna keep the door open, because if there's something that comes up that we need the message out, I'm gonna come knocking on your door saying, "Can we do another podcast?"
absolutely, I'm always open to a follow-up, always, every single day. I'm so grateful to get to know you, Kathy Hawkins. It's been a pleasure. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, how can they connect with you?
Google me. All you got to do is type my name into Google and you will find me. But otherwise, please feel free to email me, Kathy with a K, at empowernl.ca, inclusionnl.ca. And my phone number is 709-697-3323. It's a work number. It's out there. There is no such thing as a stupid question with me. Please call me. I would much rather that you call me and ask me a question about accessibility that will help break down a barrier than you feel uncomfortable to call, that you feel it's a silly question because there's no such thing, and that you get the information and the education that you need to break down that barrier.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thanks, Steph. I really appreciate the invite.
Please feel free to comment below, subscribe, connect with me on LinkedIn, and think about, how are you going to be a change maker in your organization? You can do this.